But when Anne Hathaway says that line, there was someone a few seats down from me and they like audibly gasped at that line, which was kind of funny. And I knew it was coming from the book, but in the book, when that happens, it is just like, oh my gosh, like I was shocked when I read that part. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about the book Eileen, which was written by Ottessa Moshfegh, released in 2015, and I'm comparing it with the movie Eileen, directed by William Oldroy, released in 2023. And since this is a new release, I am going to start with a spoiler-free review for the book and movie. And first of all, as far as the movie goes, like if you have read the book and you liked it, you should definitely go see this movie. I don't think you'll be disappointed because the movie leaves out a lot of details, but for the most part, it does stay true to the story in the book. You know, the sticklers might still be upset about, you know, this or that change, but for the most part, I do not think you will be disappointed. And we also get fantastic performances like by everybody. We have Thomasin Mckenzie as Eileen, and then Anne Hathaway as Rebecca, and both of them are fantastic, but also like all of the side characters are also really great. And Mrs. Polk is played by Marin Ireland, and if you are an avid audiobook listener like I am, she has narrated so many audiobooks and she is fantastic. Like she's an incredible narrator. And so when I saw her name, I recognized it, and then I looked it up, and yeah. So it was cool because like it's cool seeing an audiobook narrator I love in an actual movie and like performing, and she was amazing. And yeah, so it was just so cool to see this like popular audiobook narrator in this movie. But the movie also just like looks great, you know, the costumes and the settings and the way it's shot. Like I just like the look of the film is great, and it has the title written in like that old school way that you would see in like some movie from the 50s or 60s, which was just such a nice touch. However, if you see this movie and you had not read the book, I think you'll leave the movie feeling like there should have been more. And I even heard a reviewer say that when the movie ends, it feels like when it ends, it should just be getting started. So I feel like you'll be left wanting in some ways, but that's where the book comes in, right? Because the book gives you all the details that the movie doesn't. And both of these are a slow burn. And, you know, compared to the book, like the movie is not as slow as the book is. But nonetheless, if you haven't read the book and don't know what to expect, I could see you thinking that the movie just goes way too slow. And then by the time like things get going, it's just like, whoa, like suddenly like something crazy is happening and it comes out of nowhere, and it comes like at the last act of the film, right? But other people might enjoy it, and like they'll enjoy the atmosphere the movie is creating. And like I said, I do love slow burns because there might not be anything specific happening, but you can feel the building tension and you can feel that something is off, and you know something is going to happen. You just aren't sure what, but you can just feel the unsettling emotions that like something there's a slow burn and something is going to explode in one way or another. And so that is why I love slow burn books and movies, is I just love that building suspense and tension. And especially when you don't even know where it's going to go. So you're just like waiting and you don't even know what you're waiting for. So yeah, I feel like it just depends on if you like slow burn movies or not. But I also want to give a warning for the book and movie. Both of them have a story near the end that deals with child abuse, and I had not been expecting it when I read the book, and so it was very surprising to me and very upsetting to read. And so just I want to give a warning for people to be aware that that is a key part of this story. But on to the book review. This is an author I've been hearing about a lot, especially with her book My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I definitely want to read now. But this was my first time ever reading anything by her, and I loved her writing style, and like right away I was drawn into the story. And this is a character study of Eileen specifically, and throughout the book she's mentioning a woman named Rebecca who she meets, and we know like Rebecca causes her life to change in some way. And so you keep waiting, like when are we going to meet Rebecca? You keep talking about her, but you haven't even met her in the story yet, because this is told as adult Eileen looking back and sharing a story from her past. But Rebecca doesn't even enter the story until the halfway point. So the first 50% of this book is just showing us who Eileen is and her life with her father, and we just get to know her weird quirks. She's a very strange character, so it's just setting the stage for when they finally meet Rebecca. And then even then though, like the plot doesn't really even kick in until like the 75-80% mark. So again, a slow burn, and you know, I liked the writing style, but the narrator could be kind of repetitive at times. Like she's just telling us the same things about herself and her life kind of over and over again. And so while I was drawn in right away and I liked the writing style, it did get to a point where I was like, okay, can we actually get things moving? Can something happen? Like stop telling us the same stuff over and over again. So I liked it, but I didn't love of it, and this is her debut novel. So considering that, I'm definitely curious to read her later works and see, how they compare. But yeah, this was, despite my complaints, this was a very immersive novel, and she doesn't tell you what town she lives in. She calls it Xville. And so the town of Xville and the people in Eileen's life just feel so vivid as you're reading it, and you just feel like you're there. And Eileen herself just is such a fleshed out character, and she feels so real too. So yeah, that is my spoiler-free review for book and movie, and now I'm going to be getting into the details of the plot and how the two compare and sharing my analysis of them each. So yeah, from here on out, there will be spoilers. Beginning with just the character of Eileen, like I said, the first half of this book, we're just getting to know her, and she lives with her dad, who is an alcoholic, and they have this like unhealthy codependent relationship because it's just the two of them. She has a sister who I think is older, but she is living with a man, so she's not around, and then their mom is dead. In the book, she does have an aunt, her dad's sister, that will come and take him to church every Sunday, but she's not like, hanging out every single day. So it's mainly just Eileen and her dad. By the way, the dad going to church with the sister is not in the movie. But in the book, she's constantly thinking how like she wants to leave him and go to New York City, but she just never does. She's always just like thinking about it and fantasizing about it. And yeah, we learned so much about her. And like I said, she's just a very distinct and odd character. And I want to share a quote from the book where it just kind of tells you it gives you a taste of the writing style, but it also kind of just tells you the kind of person Eileen is. And it reads, "I would read a chronicle of ancient Egyptian medicine to study the gruesome practice of pulling the brains out of the dead through the nose like skeins of yarn. I'd like to think of my brain like that, tangled up in my skull. The idea that my brains would be untangled, straightened out, and thus refashioned into a state of peace and sanity was a comforting fantasy. I often felt that there was something weird in my brain, a problem so complicated only a lobotomy could solve it." And she also has like extreme body dysmorphia in the book specifically. Like in the movie, we see her eating chocolates, or like she chews chocolate candies and then she spits them out. And we do see that in the movie, but in the book, we just learn so much more about her strange eating habits and her dislike of her body and her face. And that's just something she talks about a lot. And she even says in the book that like her dislike for her body is like one reason why she hasn't committed suicide, basically. And we read, "The idea of anyone examining my naked corpse was enough to keep me alive. I was that ashamed of my body. It also concerned me that my demise would have no great impact, that I would blow my head off and people would say, 'That's all right, let's get something to eat.'" And like I said, this is told from like adult Eileen looking back on her past, but she comes across as an unreliable narrator because as she is telling us this story, there are so many times where she will say something happened or someone did something, but then she'll follow it with like, "Oh, but perhaps I'm misremembering it." Or there's another part where she tells a story and then she's like, "Oh, but that might not be accurate. I'm not sure." So it definitely makes you wonder like if she's even trustworthy and is she even telling us the truth? And then another detail I wanted to mention about her in both book and movie is that she will only wear her dead mother's clothing and she does not buy her own clothes. And she also doesn't bathe often, and she likes to just stew in her own filth, as we read in the book. And in the movie, we don't see this. We see her wear her mother's clothing, but we don't see her not bathing. And she just looks way too clean. Like prior to meeting Rebecca, they should have given her like greasy hair to show that she doesn't care about her appearance and she doesn't take care of herself. But to talk about her dad, so like I said, like they have this weird codependent relationship, and she definitely has like a martyr complex when it comes to the relationship, how she is mistreated by him, and just a lot of things in life, like her suffering. She likes to wallow in it, which she straight up says. There's a part in the book where she said, "I prefer to wallow in the problem, dream of better days." And she also has this car, and this takes place in December in New England. It's crazy cold, and she has a car where she has to drive with the window down, otherwise like fumes get in the car that cause her to get like sleepy and drowsy. And she says, "Part of me liked having to roll down the windows, even in the cold. I thought that I was very brave. But really, I was scared that if I made a fuss over the car, it would be taken away from me." And then also there's another part where like someone is mentioning the suffering and the problems that these boys, because she works at a boys' prison, so it's talking about like the issues they have in their life. And she says, "Why should my heart ache for anyone but myself? If anyone was trapped in suffering and abused, it was me. I was the only one whose pain was real. Mine." And yeah, her father is like a delusional alcoholic. And in the book especially, he just always thinks that there's like people spying on him or conspiracy theories and people are after him. And he's very paranoid. And he is a former police officer. And so he just has a lot of delusions about why he was, like retired from the force, which in the book, we learned that they like forced him into retirement because his drinking was getting out of hand. And he is like verbally abusive towards Eileen, constantly telling her that like she's going to amount to nothing annoying and she's ugly and she's stupid and like, what is she doing with her life? And in the book though, she does say how like there's times when they actually do like sit and drink, because she's like a bit of an alcoholic too. And so she does say how there's times where they will sit and drink and like bond, but we don't actually see that firsthand in the book. Whereas in the movie, there are a few times where we see them like drinking together and actually like talking. However, like, I don't know if you would call it bonding, because inevitably he just is like really insulting and says mean things to her. And in the movie, there is a scene where her dad falls and hits his head. So she takes him to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, he is like still kind of drunk, and he like drunkenly is trying to touch her. And when she moves his hand, he's like, oh, you know, like, come on, Joni. And Joni is the name of her sister, who I think I mentioned. So in the movie specifically, the sister is married and no longer comes around anymore. And so in this moment, Eileen realizes that their dad was like molesting Joni, her sister. And so this is like this big revelation that she has in this moment. Whereas in the book, it's different, because this like exact scene does happen in the book, but it had happened like years prior, before her mother even died. So this was like 5 years ago or something, where she picked her dad up from a bar and then the same thing happened. But then also in the book, Joni does still come by. Like, it's not like frequently, but she does come by and she acts like fine, relatively speaking. And so that was a big change, kind of, because it's the same scenario, but in the movie, it is something that she is just now realizing. Whereas in the book, like, she's known it for years. And then, yeah, I mentioned Eileen works at a boys' prison, so she is a secretary there. And she had been in college, but then when she was like 20 is when her mom got sick, so then she came back home to help her sick mother, and she started working at the prison, and then her mother died, and then before she knew it, the years just kind of flew by, and now she's 24, and she's been working at this prison for boys the whole time. Which, a quick note about the mom, really fast. So in the movie, he's talking to Eileen, and he says something, you know, like, oh, I always loved your mother, you know, no matter how it seemed. Obviously implying that he treated the mother poorly, but he's like, oh, but I always loved her. Whereas in the book, like, he and the mom did not get along when she was alive. We get multiple stories from when the mom was still alive, and they were always butting heads, and it seems like the mom drank a lot too. And then even after she's dead, the dad still talks crap about the mom. So that was just kind of a different thing with the relationship there. But anyway, at the boys' prison where Elaine works. So there's a few times in this video when instead of saying Eileen, I say Elaine. So just know that if I say Elaine and don't catch myself saying it, I mean Eileen. At the boys' prison where Elaine works, there is this guard that Elaine is obsessed with, and she even stalks him. In the movie, we do see that she has like this fantasy with him, but we definitely do not see like the extent of her obsession with him like we do in the book. In the prison is where she meets Rebecca. So Rebecca, in both book and movie, she had gone to Harvard, and now she is here working at this prison. And in the movie, she is hired as the new psychologist, whereas in the book, she was called like the prison educator or something. So she wasn't a psychologist, but it was kind of similar to some extent, I guess. And Elaine is just like instantly smitten with Rebecca as soon as she meets her, and her like love for the guard just evaporates. And Rebecca, in the book and movie, we see how she has this like conspiratorial way of talking to Elaine and making it seem like, oh, it's like the two of them against the world type of a thing. And she also is just kind of like fun and jokey and just has like this confident aura about her, as well as being just like very attractive too. And in the movie, Rebecca has this platinum blonde hair, which is not the case in the book. In the book, she had red hair. And usually minor details like this don't bother me. And even, you know, Anne Hathaway looks good with the blonde hair. So it's not like it's a huge complaint of mine. However, her red hair is brought up a number of times in the book. And in one section we read, she had an unmistakable ease and refinement of someone from the upper class. There was also something earthy about her. Her hair, especially in its red color, its roughness, its wild beauty, kept her from seeming like a snob. And so, yeah, I feel like, you know, the platinum blonde hair, it's so flashy and eye-catching, and it almost does make her seem more snobby. Like, not really, but kind of, you know? And so it just doesn't have the earthy look of red hair, for sure. But anyway, she and Eileen, they, you know, bond over the following days, and eventually Rebecca asks Eileen out for drinks, and so they go to a bar, and then in both book and movie, they dance to the music the jukebox is playing. And in the movie, a guy comes up and he's trying to dance with Rebecca, and she keeps telling him no, but when he won't stop, she like punches him and he falls, which is a great scene in the movie. And of course, Eileen is just like, oh my gosh, again, just making Rebecca so alluring and impressive. And this was not in the book. They just dance And then, they go back and sit down. But it's funny because obviously in the movie, we see Eileen just like falling in love with Rebecca. Whereas in the book, like she is describing before when they're going out for drinks, she is describing like all the work she put into her appearance as she went to go meet Rebecca. But then she follows that up with saying, "Let me be clear about this. I was not a lesbian, but I was attracted to Rebecca, yearned for her attention and approval, and I admired her. You could call it a crush. Rebecca might as well have been Marlon Brando, James Dean, Elvis, Marilyn Monroe. In such company, any normal person would want to look right, smell good." And I almost feel like that's another example of maybe her, the unreliable narrator thing where she's lying to herself and the reader, because I was getting like deeper vibes there than just someone she wanted to be friends with and impress, right? And then the movie definitely went the lesbian route and has her like falling in love with Rebecca. And there is a point in the book where Rebecca is like leaning in close talking to her, and Eileen is thinking like, if she tried to kiss me right now, like I'd go with it. So yeah, I feel like she definitely, there was something more there than she's willing to admit, I think. And in the movie, after this night at the bar, Rebecca does like give Eileen a peck on the lips and then she leaves. And yeah, Eileen is just falling head over heels. And also a lot of the dialogue comes straight from the book. And so just these different conversations she has with Rebecca are straight from the book. And then in the book, before they leave work for Christmas break, Rebecca asks Eileen if she has any Christmas plans, and that if she doesn't, she should come over to Rebecca's place and they can, like play records and hang out. And so Eileen gives her number. She writes it on Rebecca's arm. And then that Christmas, she anxiously awaits Rebecca's phone call. Whereas in the movie, after their night at the bar, Eileen goes to work and Rebecca has not come in. And so she's very sad and disappointed because she was excited to see her. However, on Christmas, Rebecca just has her phone number anyway. And so on Christmas, she does get an unexpected call from Rebecca. And before I get into the Christmas events, which this is, like a Christmas movie, so it kind of is fitting for the season. And this shirt kind of has like Christmas designs. First, before getting to that, I need to talk about Lee Polk. So there is a boy in the prison named Lee Polk, and he is in prison for killing his father. So he like stabbed his dad while he was asleep. And in the book, I'm pretty sure Lee is like 13 years old or something, 14, 15. He's like a younger teen. Whereas in the movie, like if this is a boys' prison, he has to be under 18. So he looks like he must be 17 because he looks like a later adult kid. But anyway, his dad had also been a former cop. And remember, Elaine's dad had also been a cop. And so the two of them had known each other. But ever since Lee killed his father, he has not spoken at all. And his mother never comes to visit. And one day, Eileen sees him in solitary. She like sees him through the window. And then after that, she's looking at his file. And while she's looking at his file, Rebecca walks up. And basically Rebecca ends up taking the file because she wants to read it at home. And then the next day, Lee's mom does come in to see him. And Eileen is like, what? Like she has never come in before. Like that's a weird coincidence. And she speculates that Rebecca had something to do with the mother showing up. Whereas in the movie, like Rebecca is part of the exchange with Mrs. Polk and Lee. And she says like, oh, thanks for coming in, and so we know that she called her and invited her in. But yeah, so the mom visits and it like doesn't go well and Lee doesn't say anything. And after this, Rebecca takes Lee alone into her office to try to, talk to him some more. And so now we're at Christmas Day. Rebecca calls Eileen and invites her over to her house and gives her the address. And when Eileen gets there, Rebecca is usually just like so classy and so refined. And when Eileen gets to the house, first of all, in the book, she says that it's in like a bad neighborhood. And like that should have like told her something was off. But she was like, I don't know, maybe it's cheap. And so when Rebecca opens the door, she's like holding this like angry cat that's like hissing and fussing, and she like tosses it out the door. And so just right off the bat, she's just like disheveled and a mess. And she's usually dressed so nice, but here she's wearing just like bland clothing. And in the book, I think she has like a robe on over it. Whereas in the movie, she's just wearing this like raggedy sweater. And in the book specifically, Eileen like right away is just like this is weird. Like Rebecca is very on edge and is acting like kind of erratic. And there's just like a weird vibe in the house. And Eileen even gets up to leave at one point, but Rebecca is like, no, like don't leave. Please stay. I'm sorry. I know like I'm acting strange, but just like be a friend. Just like stay and let me talk to you some more. And so Eileen is like, okay, I'll stay. Whereas in the movie, like things seem off. Also, the house Rebecca lives in is a mess, which again just doesn't fit with her persona. But in the movie, Eileen just seems blinded to all of these red flags. Like she's just like so in love and so excited to be there that she's just like, I'm here with Rebecca. And she's not noticing like how weird everything is. And in both, Rebecca like makes Eileen something to eat. In the book, she makes her ham sandwiches, but Eileen, she takes like one bite and then she doesn't want to eat anymore because the bread is stale and the ham is gummy and it just tastes gross. gross. And in the movie, she gives her like a jar of pickles and some cheese. But I think the pickles, like I feel like the food was bad though, because she like picks up a pickle and then like puts it back with like a gross look on her face, meaning Eileen does. But in both book and movie, while they're sitting there in the kitchen, Rebecca eventually is like, she starts talking about Lee Polk, and she tells her, like, she's like, you know what, that day I had Lee in the office, like he has never spoken, remember, but she's like, that day in the office, I started talking to him and he told me everything. He told me why he killed his father and he told me what was happening. And ever since then, like, I just can't stop thinking about it. And then it is at this point that Rebecca then tells Eileen, like, this is not my house. This is the Polk house, and I have Mrs. Polk tied up in the basement. So I saw this movie in theaters, and I walked in like while the trailers were still going, so I was like a little later. And when I walked in, I saw that there, including me, I think there were 5 people total, so there were not many people in this theater. But when Anne Hathaway says that line, there was someone a few seats down from me, and they like audibly gasped at that line, which was kind of funny. And I knew it was coming from the book, but in the book, when that happens, it is just like, oh my gosh, like I was shocked when I read that part. But after she says this in the movie, Eileen then is like in shock and she gets up to go leave, but Rebecca is like, no, like, please stay, I need you. In the book, we hear Eileen's thoughts, and Eileen is thinking how like betrayed she feels, because she's like, what? Like, Rebecca was just using me. Like, she didn't actually like me. She wasn't like interested in me. She didn't want to be my friend. She was just manipulating me. And so she feels very betrayed. But she doesn't actually say this to Rebecca, whereas in the movie, there is no narration. And so Eileen says this to Rebecca. She's like, what? Like, I thought you liked me. Like, I thought this was something more. And Rebecca tells her, like, no, like, I do like you. I really need your help right now. And she tells her, you know, the whole situation of how Mrs. Polk ended up in the basement. Basically, she showed up to confront Mrs. Polk because Mrs. Polk was complicit in the abuse that was going on with Lee. And so long story short, she ended up tied up in the basement, and she is trying to get her to confess, but she refuses to confess. And so she's like, I just need your help. I need you to be here and help me get her to confess to what happened. And in the book, Eileen says of Rebecca, did she honestly think that she had the power to atone for someone else's sins, that she could exact justice with her wit, her superior thinking? People born of privilege are sometimes thus confused. And at this point in the story, in both book and movie, Eileen has her father's gun because her father was being like drunk and crazy, and so the cops made him give his gun to Eileen. So she shows Rebecca that she has a gun, and Rebecca is like, perfect. And so they go into the basement, and Eileen is pointing the gun at Mrs. Polk, and she's like saying like all these mean things to Mrs. Polk to get her to confess. And in the book, after she's saying these things to Mrs. Polk, she is thinking how like, you know, I've had years of practice to speak to someone like this, because living with my dad and how he speaks to me, like I've learned how to speak like this to somebody. And yeah, Rebecca in the book is like surprised and impressed at what Elaine is saying. But eventually Mrs. Polk does confess. However, a big change in the movie, Rebecca is standing right there and she hears the whole confession. Whereas in the book, when Elaine is down there, Rebecca goes upstairs because she's like, we need to get a pencil and paper because we need this in writing. And yeah, so Mrs. Polk confesses to being in this situation where her husband was sexually abusing their son, and she allowed it to happen for, you know, her own reasons, because her husband was like, oh, he was suddenly so much nicer and he was more relaxed and he was showing love to me, which he hadn't in like a really long time. And she was also like, and who was I supposed to tell? Like, once I realized what was happening, like, who am I supposed to go to? And so that's how she justified being complicit in all of it. And in the book, near the end of her confession, we read, you wouldn't understand, she said, looking up at me. You're young. You haven't had your heart broken. But I understood her perfectly. Of course I did. Who wouldn't? She began to cry again, solemnly this time. There, I said. The first time in my life I had ever sincerely tried to comfort anyone. And after she confesses, Rebecca comes back downstairs and she tells her like, oh, like she confessed to everything. But Rebecca is like, that's not good enough. Like, we needed her to write it down and sign it. And then basically from here, Rebecca takes the gun and then she's holding it weird and the gun falls and it goes off and it shoots Mrs. Polk in the arm. And Eileen has like some type of pills that her mom had near the end of her life. And so she's like, oh, I have these pills. And so they give them to Mrs. Polk because she's like screaming. And so that like knocks her out. Whereas in the movie, so Rebecca is there, she hears the confession. And then as Mrs. Polk is saying that last line about like, oh, you wouldn't understand, Eileen is kind of like in a daze almost. And then she shoots Mrs. Polk and Rebecca is shocked. And Rebecca has all of these pills that she then gives to Mrs. Polk. And it's not clear if this kills her or if it just knocks her out. But regardless, she is now, you know, unconscious or dead. And Rebecca is like, why did you do that? Why did you shoot her? And Eileen just says, I was a upset. And from there, in both book and movie, Eileen then tells her, like, you know what? Like, my dad is a drunk. Like, we can take Mrs. Polk's body to my house, put the gun in his hands, and people will think that he did it. And we can just leave and we can move to New York City and just start over together. And in the movie, she even tells her, like, I love you. Like, we can start a life together. And in the movie, in this scene, like, her eyes are just like shining. Eileen's eyes are just like shining as she talks to Rebecca about this. And in the book, she does talk multiple times as they are like moving the body and stuff. She says how like she's trying to hide her jubilance and her excitement. So she is like, has this like weird high and excitement going on during all of this drama. But yeah, Rebecca agrees to do this. And so they put Mrs. Polk in Eileen's car. And then when Eileen is getting ready to leave, Rebecca is like, I'm just going to clean up the mess in the house and then I'll meet you at your house and we can leave together from there. And so Eileen is like, awesome, sounds good. I'll see you soon. And in the movie, she drives home, she gets her money, and then she's sitting and she's waiting for Rebecca to show up. But Rebecca never does show up and she waits hours. It's like till morning and Rebecca has not shown up and she realized she has abandoned her. And so then she drives and she takes her car with the body to this like secluded area and she turns the car on, rolls the windows up, and she leaves and she goes and hitchhikes to New York City. And we see her in a truck that picked her up. And even though Rebecca didn't show up, we see her smiling as she is headed toward New York City. Whereas in the movie, after she leaves the Polk house, she goes to her house, she gets all of her money, and then she doesn't even wait for Rebecca. She just leaves. And in the book we read, I could have sat and waited for hours for Rebecca to show up, but there was no point. I knew she was not coming. I knew that she was long gone. In the end, she was a coward. Idealism without consequences is the pathetic dream of every spoiled brat, I suppose. And like I said, in the book at this point, Mrs. Polk isn't dead. She is just unconscious. And so from here, Eileen doesn't even wait. She just gets her money and then she drives to like a secluded area. And remember, like the fumes in the car are important because she had to drive with the windows down. Otherwise, these fumes would like make her unconscious potentially and kill her. And so she leaves Mrs. Polk in the car with it turned on, the windows rolled up. That way she will die in her sleep from these fumes. And then as we saw in the movie, she then hitchhikes to New York City. But throughout this book, as she is telling us the story, she will sometimes come back to the present or the more recent past and tell us about her life after all of this happened. And it seems like she's living a good life. She had been married like 2 or 3 times, but by the time she's telling us this story, she is now single, which is the way she likes it. Near the end of the book, she says, "Here is how I spend my days now. I live in a beautiful place. I sleep in a beautiful bed. I eat beautiful food. I go for walks through beautiful places. I care for people deeply. At night, my bed is full of love because I am alone in it. I cry easily from pain and from pleasure, and I don't apologize for that. In the mornings, I step outside and I'm thankful for another day." And so it seems like she's living a good life and she's like a healthier person. However, again, because she's an unreliable narrator, it makes me wonder if her picture for what her life is like now, I wonder how accurate it even is and if she is as happy and content as she claims to be. But some final thoughts. So like I said, in the book, even before she met Rebecca, she was constantly thinking about how she wanted to leave and go to New York City, but she just felt trapped and stuck and she could never get herself to actually do it. And it's not until Rebecca comes in. And so she's like grateful for Rebecca in her life ultimately because it like spurred her to actually take action and leave. And that scene at the end of the movie when she's in the car, you know, in someone else's car, hitchhiking, going to New York City, and she starts smiling. So even though obviously she is like upset that Rebecca didn't join her and like feeling betrayed by Rebecca, but at the same time, I think she's smiling because, you know, this is a coming of age story in some ways, right? And so she has discovered this new side of herself, right? And like this new, more empowered side who like takes action and does things and doesn't just like feel stuck and trapped and lets herself be manipulated by her father and all these things. And so now like she's taking her life into her own hands essentially. So I think she's smiling because of the door this is opening up in her life. And I do think it makes sense in the movie to have Eileen be the one who just like instinctively shoots Mrs. Polk without really even thinking about it, it doesn't seem. Because Mrs. Polk is saying like, oh, you want to understand what it's like to be in this toxic relationship and to feel stuck and to feel trapped with this person you hate. Also this person who is a child molester. And remember in the movie, she had just recently realized that about her own father. So as Mrs. Polk is saying like, oh, you don't understand, Eileen does understand, at least to a certain extent, right? And so it makes sense that like instinctively she just ends up shooting her. And then Rebecca is an interesting character too. And I think in the book, we get more explanation as to the actions Rebecca takes because she is like taking extreme action with the Polks, right? And I was watching Fish Jelly Film Reviews talk about this movie. I've mentioned their channel before, highly recommend them. But Nick was saying how like based on the movie, like the backstory he created was that Rebecca was like this Harvard graduate who maybe for a while was like a hotshot in her field, but then due to like her neurotic ways, she kind of like burned a lot of bridges and was now sort of going downhill in her life and in her career. And that is why she's now like working at this boys' prison and is just more unhinged in a lot of ways. And she also knows that she's attractive. And I feel like, you know, they talked about this too, Fish Jelly, about how she saw Eileen, sorry. And like she could tell Eileen was smitten and she knew like this is someone that I can use and this is someone that I can easily manipulate. And also in both book and movie, she tells Eileen that she never stays with any man for long and she never stays any place for long and she's just constantly on the move, basically. And I also think it was a very intentional nod for the character to be named Rebecca as a nod to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. And Eileen even has some of the traits of the new Mrs. De Winter in that book. And both books are like slow burn thrillers and they do have some similarities there. And also this book was also giving me Carol vibes, especially like in the beginning with her like fascination with Rebecca, because Carol is about like this striking blonde, confident woman who has a relationship with like this shy, reserved brunette. So we have some similarities. And then Carol also takes place in the 50s, whereas this one is like 1964. I think Carol is the 50s, but so they're both like retro in that way. And even though Carol is like a romantic drama, it's not a slow burn thriller. Even so, I think the author Patricia Highsmith, I think she would have liked the book Eileen because she was kind of an odd person herself from what I've read about her. So I feel like she would have approved of this book and movie. And when it comes to book versus movie, so I did like the way this book was framed as like Eileen being like this old woman who has this secret that she has never revealed. And now that she is later in life, she is finally telling this huge secret. And she's also contemplating like, what was it about Rebecca that made me so drawn to her? And why did I fall for the phony way she's talked to me and the phony way she like tried to get close to me and the way she used me? And like, why was I so willing to help her in this situation? And why did Rebecca do what she did? And she does have her own speculations, which I kind of shared, right? Like she was just upper class and rich. And what was it, like idealism without consequences? And she was a coward. So I did like the way it was framed in that way. And also like this book and movie just pair together so well because like I said, the book gives so many more details than the movie does and just gives you a fuller picture of everything. But then the movie, we get great visuals, great performances, and the movie also gets to the point quicker than the book had. And then something that also surprised me with this adaptation is I expected Mrs. Polk's confession to be a bit more watered down than the way it was in the book because it's very descriptive. And movies tend to do that, right? They tend to sanitize things in a way to make it more palpable for the audience or like to appease a wider audience. But that is not the case. Like her confession is almost like verbatim from the book. So that did catch me by surprise. But yeah, I did think this was a really faithful adaptation. I am kind of wanting to say that the movie wins in large part due to the performances and just like the visual aspect and seeing it play out on screen and, you know, trimming some of the details, which some details were unnecessary. But then, like I've been saying, if you like the movie, you definitely should read the book so that you can see the bigger picture and get all of those details because yeah, they just pair together so well. But yeah, I'm going to say the movie wins. Anne Hathaway was fantastic. And Thomasin Mckenzie, I did really like her too. And I just love her movie choices. Like if I were an actor, I feel like I would be choosing movies similar to what Mckenzie has been choosing. So yeah, I didn't love or hate the book or a movie. Like they were both, like I said, 3 out of 5 stars. But if you love one, you should definitely look into the other. And both combined just create a full experience of it all. So that is my book and movie review for Eileen. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know if you have read any other books by Ottessa Moshfegh, specifically My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I put a bunch of her books on hold at the library, so hopefully they come in soon and I can just binge read her books because I'm so curious to read more from her. So yeah, comment your thoughts down below on this author, on the movie, on the book, on Anne Hathaway, on Thomasin Mckenzie. And also if you want more, if you enjoyed this video and you want more content, I will link to Rebecca. Like I said, they have like some similarities, these two, Eileen and Rebecca, but I will also link to Carol in the description down below in case you want to watch that one as well. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.